Shia Kappas, the author of Politico's Illinois Playbook. Politico is really excited today to join Lincoln Forum and the Union League Club of Chicago for this virtual event. The subject, what will college look like in the fall? This is a question that's come up in conversations with my friends all the time. I have children, including one who just graduated from college, and it comes up in stories every day that we publish in the Playbook. What we know is that colleges and universities are making big decisions that could change the course of higher education in the near future and possibly in the long term. The challenge is there are so many uncertainties because of coronavirus that are keeping everything up in the air. Just when schools might think they have a handle on it, we get this new information that changes everything, whether it's the science, about the disease, the government making changes to the classroom. It affects health, safety, equity, access, affordability, and logistics. So we have this great panel of experts who are going to weigh in on all of that and tell us what it all means. If you have questions for the panel, submit them on the little Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom controls. And now, the moment we've been waiting for. Please join me in welcoming Susan Carlson. She is a fellow journalist. She's on NBC5 Chicago News. She's a reporter, and she's an adjunct university professor. So she has this special expertise on the subject. Susan, take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Shia. It's so nice to be here and among these esteemed panelists. We do have a lot to get through today because when it comes to higher education, one thing is for sure, and that is everybody seems to be on a slightly different page. There's no rule book here. There's no standard course of action. Just to give you a couple examples, we know that Stanford has released plans that half the students will be on campus for one semester, the other half will be on campus for the spring semester. At Harvard, they're only allowing about 40% of their undergrads even to return to limit the number of students on campus. And here in Illinois, many universities seem to be operating on some type of a hybrid format, a mixture of both online and in-class teaching. Many of them plan to finish by Thanksgiving and shift entirely to online by Thanksgiving in preparation for what could be another wave of COVID-19. So we would like to begin by some opening remarks, going around our esteemed panelists. If you could start by simply introducing yourself and your university and give us your overall strategy for your academic plan. What do you plan to do in terms of online versus in-class teaching? And tell us a little bit about how you came up with this decision, because I know a lot of thought, a lot of task force groups have been created to come up with this. So I'm just going to go around. We've already established we're all friends here, so I'm not trying to disrespect by calling you by your first names. It's just that you're all such nice, lovely people on top of being such great academics. So let's start, if we could, with Robert from the University of Illinois. Why don't you start our opening remarks, Robert?
Well, first of all, let me start by saying thank you for the opportunity to participate in this critical conversation. Again, named Robert Jones, and I have the great pleasure of serving as the Chancellor of the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign since September 26th of 2016. Prior to coming to Illinois, I spent almost 4 years as the president of the State University of New York at Albany as part of the SUNY system. That's where I had the great pleasure of working and meeting and working with my friend Sam Stanley. And before that, spent about 34 and a half years as a faculty member in the Department of Agronomy and Plant Genetics at the University of Minnesota, and concurrent with the last 25 years of that period as a senior administrator of the University of Minnesota system. So to cut to the chase here, our plan is to resume on-campus instruction in fall of 2020 in a manner that is modified, as Susan stated, to address the continuing concerns about the pandemic. We are operating on the assumption that because there is no vaccine at the moment, there is no known endpoint to when this pandemic might end. So we are operating on the assumption that it may be with us for some time. Our semester will consist, as Susan said, of a blend of in-person and remote instruction. with structure that is framed around and abiding by the established rules of the state of Illinois on the plan the governor calls the Restore Illinois plan. We believe that the residential experience is an absolutely critical component of the education mission of land-grant universities like Illinois. And we plan to offer as much in-person instruction as we possibly can. And the residential occupancy will be restricted in terms of space and health and safety allowance. We will maximize our in-person classes as much as possible, especially for courses that require hands-on activity and peer-to-peer interactions such as labs and performance art kinds of things. But our face-to-face instruction will be supplemented by online instruction. And classes that meet in person will be in spaces that allow us to do the social distancing. And at the forefront of everything that we do, we've led all of our decisions are driven by data and with the health and safety of every member of our community at the forefront of our decisions. So most large class sections will likely be online, as I stated earlier. And all of this is framed around a really robust process. We formed a steering committee of about 17 people that has 7 work teams that has 15, 20 people on it. So we really took this as a task of really redefining how the whole university needs to operate in order to come back to fall operation face-to-face as safely as possible. I'll end with this. The core part of our strategy is based on a very highly sophisticated and innovative testing strategy that is what we call SHIELD, where we're doing a saliva-based test that's linked to an app where we will be able to do the contact tracing and exposure notification that is tied to a system of hospital interface, so that if you are tested positive, you will then be able to get via this app the kind of intervention that you need in order to treat your disease safely. So we're very, very excited about the opportunities that we're building. But again, it's all built around being able to do this saliva-based testing, which we know that we will be able to test as many as 10,000 tests per day in order to know what the COVID-19 status of our community, and that's linked to an algorithm that's going to allow us to do specialized or targeted testing as well. And that is going to be our best efforts to allow us to open in the fall and hopefully be able to stay face-to-face until December, when the last 6 days will move to remote instruction. So thank you very much.
Joanne?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Joanne Rooney, and I have the honor and privilege of being the president of Loyola University Chicago. And this is, I'll be entering my 5th academic year as we speak. And Loyola has been part of the city of Chicago for many, many years. In fact, we're actually celebrating our sesquicentennial. So this year has marked a number of really important events for us, not in addition, if you will, to what we're all experiencing with COVID-19. You know, I think while we're talking about all of us have maybe slightly different plans moving forward, I think one thing we can all agree on is that this global public health crisis, along with the social issues of the day, only further underscores our need for education regardless of the mode of delivery. And each of our commitments to doing this, no matter whether it's in person, a combination of online and in person, is actually what's going to be most critical. And being able to lead that, lead our educational models, keep our research going, and continue to serve our communities is really at the heart of what we're doing. And that's what's grounding our work towards this fall. As I'm sure we'll hear from some of the other schools, early on in the spring, we put together a large response team that was able to look at all the different aspects of the university, from the academics to our facilities to student life. And now that team has over 235 people across the university involved, and that's faculty and staff, looking at all aspects. In the spring, it was how do we transition 3,400 sections online? And now it's about what are the best ways that we can safely engage with our students and our community going forward. And right now, where we're at as a university, we're continuing to look at two options. Our preferred would be what some people may describe as a hybrid, which means we will have on-campus instruction in a number of our different classes, but we're always preserving the ability for students to be able to access that online. Again, giving the choice for what people feel is best for them, whether it's because of their home situation or concerns about medical. So we're making sure we're able to accommodate all of that. As you've also heard, because we're part of Illinois, we are following the guidelines with Restore Illinois. We are looking at how best to limit the numbers of students that would be in classrooms, respecting social distancing, making sure we're able to take the precautionary measures between classes, manage the flow of students, and likewise in our residence halls. We already have announced that we will be moving to single occupancy across all of our residence halls. Again, to help preserve some of the social distancing, yet still, as we heard, finding ways to engage with our students. I will also say that we know even with online and our students who choose to study remotely or have classes remotely, we're looking at the ways that we can continue to engage them with, say, a learning community that they may have been part of on campus. So while our plans continue to fluctuate, and frankly, the news that we hear every day about what is legally allowable but medically advisable, and that will drive our decisions, the health and safety of our faculty, staff, and students, we also know that we're going to continue to look for new and different ways to engage all of our students, keep our connections with the community, and then also as a research institution, our ability to continue with our research and the work that's happening, not just on public health and towards vaccines, but all of the research we're doing in our communities, even around public policy issues, must continue to be maintained. So I'm sure we'll get into more specifics, but like so many of my colleagues, some of these plans and specificity is a little bit fluid, but it's all grounded in data. It's grounded in research. It's grounded in what's legally allowable, medically advisable, and it's also grounded with input that we're getting from our faculty, staff, and students, and even families about how best to navigate this going forward. But at the heart of this, it's important that as educational institutions, we're actually leading the way for how to engage no matter in what format.
All right, Samula?
Well, thank you, Susan, and it's great to be with you and great to be with my colleagues. I'm Sam Stanley, president of Michigan State University, in my 11th month as president of Michigan State University. Before then, as Robert mentioned, I was part of the SUNY system at Stony Brook University in New York. And before then at Washington University in St. Louis. And pertinent to today's discussion, I was a professor in infectious diseases there with an expertise area on emerging infectious diseases. So although I'm sure that had nothing to do with the decision of the Board of Trustees of Michigan State University to hire me, it may have been a benefit, we'll see, going forward. I also wanted to just say hello to all the Spartan alums who are living and working in Chicago. Chicago happens to be the city where more alums live and work than any other place except locations in Michigan. So to all of them, my best. So Michigan State University was actually the first university in Michigan to transition online in March. At that time, we waited until a case was reported. When the first case was reported in Michigan State, we made the transition to going fully online remote. And 2 days later, we went to all working at home, except those who were essential to be on campus. And so eventually about 88% of the campus was working remotely during this time. And we did this weeks before any shelter in place order occurred from the state. And I think we had benefits from that. During the spring semester, we ended up with very few cases on campus. And I think our goal always, and I think President Rooney talked about it and Robert talked about it as well, has really been to focus on health and safety and evidence-based decisions. And that's been a key of what we've wanted to do. When we began to think about the fall, the first question we asked was really, could it be done safely? Could we bring back residential components to our work? We never stopped teaching. One of the things that's, we keep talking about is reopening. Our campuses have been open. We've continued to teach. We taught over this summer, but of course we switched to primarily remote and online teaching. So the first thing we asked was, could we bring back a residential component? And could we bring back in-person teaching? So the first thing we did was set up a task force, as others have done. We now have about 21 working groups, but that task force in the early phases came to the decision that we thought we could do this and do it safely. We wanted to do it with a values-based approach, where we thought about issues around equity, we thought about issues around access, and we thought about ways in which people felt that they were part of the community in making decisions. And that inclusivity has been very important to us. We wanted to make sure we were following what was happening in public health trends in Michigan and nationally. And actually, overall in Michigan, the news has been good. We were one of the earliest states to have a significant level of infection, particularly in Southeast Michigan and Detroit. That has gotten much better. And generally, our trends have been good, although they're peaking up a little bit now, and we're watching that very carefully. We want to be aware of what's happening in our community. We want to be aware of what's happening in our state, and we want to be aware of what's happening nationally as well. We then said, what are the principles we want to open and what's going to be most important? And we decided the most important thing was we needed people in our community to accept personal responsibility for helping to take care of others, and that the campus community had to buy into this. We know exactly what it takes to stop the spread of COVID-19. We know that face masks are effective. We know that social distancing, or as we're referring to it as physical distancing, makes a difference. We know that good hygiene makes a difference. We know that avoiding a large gathering indoors make a difference. All these things are ways to stop the spread of COVID-19. And so if we're going to be successful at all, we have to make sure that every member of our campus community buys into this. So that's where a lot of our efforts has gone, in the beginning that communication process, letting people know what it's expected to be. If you're going to be a Spartan on campus, these are the things you're going to have to do. And making sure people understand that things will be different than they were before. It's about going into every classroom and measuring and figuring out how many students can be safely fit into that classroom. It's about going and taking a look at our hallways and figuring out ways to minimize ways in which people may be passing each other and increasing the chance of contact. All of these things I think are really important. But as I said before, we know this works, and there's other countries where with mask wearing and with social distancing, they've been able to overcome the disease and greatly reduce cases, even with very dense concentrations of population. I look at places like Seoul, Korea, Singapore, as other places that have been able to do this. Second, we wanted to make sure we could offer testing to everyone who requires it. So that for us is people with symptoms, people exposed to someone who has COVID-19. And we want to make it so there's not delays in testing or results. We want to make sure that no one experiences any barriers to getting tested going forward. And then when we have test results, we need to be able to act on them, to effectively do contact tracing, to isolate people who are infected and support them if they live on campus. Now that's a partnership for us with our local public health apparatus as well as things that we'll be standing up ourselves. But this is critically important to us. We then needed to make sure we were working with partners in the community to make sure we have the medical capacity and public health infrastructure to deal with increased cases if we have a significant outbreak. And finally, we have to be willing to adapt to changing circumstances and be ready to change if necessary in the name of safety and effectiveness of teaching. We're thinking about that, particularly in the context of students returning to home, is a particularly important concern for me. So we're developing capacity to test at large scale, as Robert talked about. But our main goal at this point in time is to return on campus September 2nd, if health and safety allow, to really feature masks and social distancing and all the personal responsibility things I've talked about, to have a combination of as my colleagues have mentioned, both hybrid and online classes with in-person classes as well, and continue to emphasize the fact that we all need to care for each other if we're going to be safe on campus. And I'll stop there.
All right, Rebecca.
Okay. I'm delighted to be here. I'm Rebecca Blank. I'm the chancellor at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. I'm in my 7th year there, so I've been there a little longer. Madison is, of course, the flagship university of the University of Wisconsin campuses. Like Sam, we have a lot of great students who come from the Chicago area and a lot of great alums who live there. So I'm delighted to be here. If the question is, what is college going to look like this fall? The answer is, well, some of it's going to be familiar and some of it's going to be really different. And at Wisconsin, we're doing some things that are similar to some of the issues that the other 3 have talked about. We are open. We're going to have a full curriculum, but we're delivering it in a hybrid model. One of the things that was very clear when we closed in the middle of March, like everyone else, and switched to a fully online curriculum is that there's some things that are just harder to deliver online. There's certain educational experiences that don't go as well. Some of that is small group experiences. Some of that is community practice. Some of that is lab work that you have to do in the sciences. And similarly on the research front, and we're a major engine of research, there's certain types of research you can't do at home in front of a computer. You have to be in a laboratory and in physical interaction with things, right? So we have been slowly reopening and are planning to invite students back when we fully reopen for campus on September 2nd, if they can safely come back, given their own health situation. You know, and we're trying to do as much as we can within good health guidelines that still allow for the types of informal interactions, sparked conversations, great discussions, both in the classroom and outside the classroom, that are just central to a really good undergraduate and graduate school education. So our classrooms, like everyone else's, are going to be more distanced. We are requiring that everyone wear masks when they're inside in public spaces. That means in the classroom as well as in the hallways. You know, all of this is going to work if you put in place a strong set of health protocols combined with your educational and research activities. So, you know, like others, testing is at the center of that. And we have, I think, a very strong testing plan. We're calling it our 3-part testing plan, which is drop-in centers available to anyone in the community, surveillance testing to monitor what's happening across the population and pinpoint problems if they're starting to arise, and targeted testing aimed at groups for whom we particularly have a duty of care, and that's particularly our dorms, of course, our athletic teams, some of those groups. So we combine testing then with all sorts of other health protocols, and Sam listed this. We're saying there are 5 other things you've got to do in addition to being part of our testing regime. You've got to wear a mask, always in public, always when you can't socially distance. You need to be physically distanced whenever possible. Our advice for the hallways is keep moving, keep distant, and wear your mask. We need to follow all sorts of special cleaning protocols. That includes, I always feel like a kindergarten teacher, but you know, washing your hands regularly is one of the most effective ways to prevent the spread of disease, and we're going to keep communicating that. We are going to do symptom monitoring, trying to push that out to people as frequently as possible. And then, of course, we're going to have contact tracing. If we do find a case of infection, we want to make sure we catch it and ask people to isolate who they may have been in close contact with. You know, all of this is put together with the advice of our medical experts. We have, like everyone else, have had, I think, 10 big teams working on different aspects of this reopening. All of them have sub-teams. There's some 300 plus people who have been involved in all of this planning effort, and that circle keeps getting bigger as we move forward. It is clear there are some students who will not get to campus and shouldn't come to campus. There's some faculty who should not be in the classroom. And you know, the advantage of a hybrid curriculum is it means there will be courses available online for those students who can't be there. There will be courses for faculty to teach who cannot be physically in the classroom. But there will also be opportunities, and we hope for all of our students who are on campus, there will be at least 1 or, if not 2, small group courses, experiences where they get some in-person education in addition to the online education. So, you know, there's lots of moving parts in all of this. There's lots of uncertainty. Like others, we're opening on time. We're planning to go fully online for the last week and a half of the semester, which is after Thanksgiving, so people don't have to go away and then come back. You know, as we monitor what's happening in the larger universe around us, in our communities around us, you know, if things change, we will change our plans. But we just think it's very, very important for both for education as well as for research to try to be as open as we can be within the parameters of good health guidance.
All right, excellent. Well, I think I will direct this first question to Sam based on your medical background as well. But the questions are pouring in from our audience. So we just want to acknowledge all the people who are out there. We appreciate it. We are reading your questions. A lot of them are asking the same questions. And one big question that keeps coming in is there a policy in place when a student or a staff member starts to show signs or ultimately test positive for COVID-19? What happens then?
So we've worked very hard to get that pathway in place, essentially. And it's going to be one of the major education processes as people come and before they come to campus, is how we do this and what we do. But basically, it'll involve close communication. So it involves for our students, let me take a student, for example. It involves, we've made a number available for them, a hotline essentially that they can call if they start exhibiting symptoms. In our materials that's coming ahead of time to them, we talk about beginning the process of self-monitoring yourself, something Becky mentioned, where you're doing your own health screens, where you're asking every morning, do I have a fever? Do I have a cough? Do I just simply not feel well? Can I not taste or smell? Is food different? All these kind of things that people can ask. So they're doing that pre-screening. If that triggers something, then we have a number for them to call where they'll be able to talk to one of our folks in student health and describe what's happening. In that case, they may be referred for a test. So based on what they said, my guess is our threshold is very low. They will probably be referred for testing and there'll be a protocol associated for what's happening with testing. If they then test positive, we will of course be working with the health department on this as well. We will notify the health department. We will work to put them in isolation and we will begin the contact tracing process to understand who they may have had contact with so we can get those individuals tested as well. One of the critical things for me in all this, again, gets back to what we talked about before, is the mask wearing. In the absence of mask wearing, contact tracing becomes extraordinarily difficult because you can imagine on a college campus the number of contacts people may have, the classrooms approaches, the classrooms they're in. So that's why I find it very important to simplify by making sure everybody's wearing a mask at all times if we can, other than when they're inside their rooms or to eat, obviously, in controlled, separated situations. But that's kind of the process we would go by. If they have symptoms that make us concerned that they could be ill at this point in time, then they need to come to student health and see a physician where they can have a complete examination by that physician, by that provider, get tested there with point of care testing where we have something that would be available in an hour for testing there that we can make a decision on and then go from there going forward in terms of what that test shows and what their symptoms are.
Well, you mentioned all the contact that's involved. Would those classes that the student, if perhaps an infected student attended, would they all have to suddenly shift to online?
So no. So I think the answer is, again, if people are wearing the mask, if they've been socially distant, then for the purpose of public health, we would not consider that a contact that required tracing. If on the other hand, they had a small gathering in their room with 4 or 5 other students and no one was wearing a mask, those are all contacts and those are all people we would need. So we'd rely on people and the questions we ask to determine whether this constitutes something that requires further follow-up. And again, this is going to be done in conjunction with our local public health, with the Ingham County, in our case, for Michigan State Public Health Department. We're going to provide people to help supplement their work because we know we add a significant burden once our students are on campus. So we want to make sure they're not overwhelmed, but they would be helping us with all of this process.
All right, Joanne, this question directed to you at Loyola. As you know, in Chicago, we now have a travel order in place for people coming in from 15 states where the numbers appear to be out of control. 2 weeks in quarantine. How will Chicago University handle that quarantine that has now been put in place?
Well, as you mentioned, this is something that we just learned about this week and that the city did, but the city has also told us that that list will continue potentially to change. So we have already started to assemble the listing of the students that would be impacted under this current list of 15. And we're working that into a time frame for when those students, if they were planning on living on campus, when they would need to be on campus or even in the city to quarantine during those 2 weeks prior to any classes starting. But this is a dynamic situation, so we could foresee as we even get closer to the start of classes, it could be very possible that a student would come from a state, have to quarantine either on campus or if they're in an off-campus residential area. And then they would have access because all of our classes, even if they're going to be offered in person, will have an online component. They would be asked then to join that class from an online component and then be able to join when medically feasible. So it is a complex situation, and because it is likely to change over the ensuing weeks, but we're already factoring that in, both in terms of when we would ask those students to arrive, and then as this changes, how we would ask those students particularly to be able to quarantine, start their classes, and then when possible, resume it if that was a class that was on campus.
Okay. Questions are also coming in about international students. And Robert, perhaps you want to start, but if anybody else wants to chime in afterward, please feel free. The more information coming out today, the better, because I know a lot of people are hungry for information. So as we know, ICE has said that international students that are going to universities that are solely online should remain in their home country, not come to the United States to take those classes. Now, in response, some news coming out, MIT and Harvard just filing a lawsuit. We want to know if you can please comment on the implications for international students in general, and how do you see these lawsuits, which are expected to continue, impacting the outcome?
Well, this, as you said, is something that has happened in the last day or two, and I sent out a mass email to our university community this morning, as well as the Director of International Programs is communicating directly with our students about the implications of the ICE directive. And from our perspective, and I think it's true with all the four of us, is that because we have been very, very clear about delivering a hybrid version of our educational environment this year, that this should allow us to still be able to have our international students arrive at our university and begin their education, where they'll be able to take at least one, potentially more, course online. But the major operating principle here is that the majority of the instruction, the way I understand it, has to be some kind of face-to-face format. And I've had conversations with the APLU and talked to some of my colleagues from around the country, and I think we all are very much concerned about this. The lawsuit that Harvard and MIT has filed, one of the biggest questions is that probably will delay things somewhat, but whether or not, if there is a resolution of that, whether it will be applicable to the rest of higher education. And so we're weighing what the options are here, but from our perspective, the fact that we are planning to have a hybrid form of delivering education should allow us to still be able to admit those international students. But you can imagine, Susan, the mere fact that there is a perspective out there that this may have a very negative impact on the number of students that actually come to our universities, even more so than what we were concerned about before. Because now the greatest issue, if I come to Illinois and if something happens beyond the university control that causes it to close down, will I be forced to leave the country? And so we're interpreting it that because of our hybrid nature of what we're doing, that we should be able to continue to provide education for those students. But it's a fluid process, and there's a lot of unknowns that we're all trying to resolve at the moment.
Okay. Another question coming in, we'll direct this to Rebecca. Kristen is asking, will outside visitors be allowed on campus?
So we are very strongly recommending that students travel as little as possible, and that outside visitors not, mom and dad don't plan to visit this semester, just because that type of mixing, as we all know, increases the risk of infection. Now, we've got a lot of students who live within 50 miles of campus, or they're 100 miles away in Milwaukee. And I know it's not going to be possible to tell those students that they can't occasionally travel back and forth, but we are going to try to limit it. We are limiting the number of people who can come with a student when they move into the dorms. They can't bring the whole family with them this year. And we are not going to be holding a parents' weekend, which almost all schools do. To the extent that we can limit travel, we will try to do so.
Oh, it's kind of sad. Going to be a different kind of year, but
It's going to be a different type of year.
we're going to make the most of it. Okay, people want to know, Julie specifically writing, what percentage of students do you expect to return to campus in the fall? A lot of other questions concerning the financial repercussions. We know that in general, some enrollments have dropped, some parents opting to make this kind of a bye year for students, feeling that they're not getting the full college experience. Can we go around the panel and hear all of your thoughts on the financial implications and enrollments this fall?
Sam, I'll go first if that's okay.
Sure.
The financial impact has been significant at Michigan State University, and I know it has for my colleagues as well. And I think we're seeing it in two ways. One, for the public universities, it's in state support. Our state allocation, I think, is jeopardized. And secondly, is enrollment, as you mentioned, Susan. And particularly for us, that's international student enrollment, which we've seen significant declines. And that's the visa issues that occurred before this most recent ICE decision. That, I think, has driven down certainly our incoming international students this year. And I think we're probably looking at about a 26% reduction right now in terms of the deposits we've had. But who actually is going to be able to get on campus is another question, and that's the major challenge for us. For us, our domestic enrollment is actually somewhat higher now than it was last year, but we'll see what happens. Again, part of it is going to be related to what we end up doing. Are we open September 2nd? I think that'll make a difference. And then what classes can people get that they want? One of the challenges we're facing is that we have probably a number of students who, based on the courses they're taking, particularly in areas that they had large classes, so areas like, if they're taking chemistry, for example, you have large chemistry classes, large mathematical classes. Those have tended to go mainly online. So we do have some students where most of their classes are going to be online. And so some of those students may elect not to come back to campus, but to continue. But I would encourage, speaking out to students and parents, not to take a gap year if you can avoid it. I think maintaining your momentum for education is incredibly important. As the economy recovers after COVID-19, there are going to be opportunities, and more opportunities than ever, I think, for college-educated individuals. So I think it probably would be a mistake to end your momentum. I think what we're doing at Michigan State University, what all my colleagues are doing, are giving you the option of taking things from home online, coming to campus if you want to experience the residential components. But I think either way, I think you're going to find a solution that would make college right for you in this coming year.
Joanne, your thoughts on the implications and enrollment at Loyola?
Absolutely. And I'm going to pick up on what Sam just said, which is that we're actually seeing that our students, in most cases, are really preferring to continue their education. We actually had strong enrollments throughout the summer of students who are taking advantage of being able to take courses over the summer, and those were all online. So with the fall, we're seeing good indications of students returning, of graduate enrollment up, even of our entering freshman class. And that's before there's a full understanding of exactly which courses will be online and which ones will be in this hybrid mode. But there really is this interest to continue and to engage with their education. That said, there will be still a very significant financial impact to this, because I mentioned early on, we're going to go to single occupancy residence halls. That means right there that over half of our rooms or half of our occupancy will be down. That's very, very significant for us. It's in the tens of millions of dollars. The second thing, many of us actually also bring groups from outside of campus for conferences and meetings, and we have a retreat center. None of that's going to be possible because it's not possible to bring these groups on campus. So a lot of the external work and the ways that we've engaged with our community on the campuses has changed. So that said, there are also some additional costs. You're hearing all the ways that we have to change our classrooms and add technology maybe to spaces that before weren't classrooms, and now they're going to be because of our need to make sure that we're able to de-densify. Making sure that people who are teaching online or students that need online access that may not have the best equipment. This past spring, we found that we were sending hotspots to those that may have not had the most dependable internet connections, computer equipment to faculty and even some students. So between the loss of revenue, if you will, in some ways, because of the mandated de-densification, our inability to bring external groups to campus and the additional cost, there'll be a significant financial hit. But we're doing any of our adjustments, if you will, in expenses in those areas that do not have impact on the academic area, the research area, or the student experience. It's really in these support areas, but it is going to be significant.
Robert, what percentage do you expect in terms of enrollment and returning to campus at U of I?
Well, up until yesterday, we were greatly encouraged that we would not have any significant decline, and particularly as my colleagues have said, we really expect our undergraduate enrollment to be very, very high with domestic and non-resident U.S. students, but there probably will be a slight downturn we anticipate in international students that may have visa problems. As you know, we have one of the largest international student populations among higher education institutions in the country. So it all depends on how this issue plays out. But we do anticipate that our undergraduate enrollment overall may be on par with last year and may even be slightly higher. We're hearing from parents and from families a very strong desire to return to campus and participate in face-to-face education because we know a large part of the undergraduate experience and graduate experience occurs outside of the formal classroom. The financial implications, still a work in progress. We already know that this has cost us in excess of $80 million, and that was up through the end of the fiscal year. But a lot of it is going to depend on how many students actually return. And of course, we haven't mentioned the A word yet, our athletics program, and the implications of whether or not there are 3 of us that sit in this thing called the Big Ten, which has 14 institutions. And one of the biggest issues for us is whether or not there's going to be football in the fall and whether or not there's going to be basketball subsequent to that. So the cost could double from what we have experienced so far for many of our institutions, depending on whether there's a second wave, depending on if we're able to successfully complete fall semester and then going away and Thanksgiving, as my colleagues have indicated. So there's still a lot of unknowns, but the costs have been already tremendous, and we're just going to have to wait and see what plays out in the fall. And we've had to buy computers, and because our testing is based on an app, we're buying cell phones and all kinds of things that are necessary in order for our testing and contact tracing to work, as well as for educational continuity for underrepresented students or those that may not have access to computers or other kinds of tools that are going to be necessary to successfully navigate this academic year.
Okay, and you mentioned athletics. We're going to get to that next. But before we do that, we want to check in with Rebecca on the University of Wisconsin in terms of financial implications and enrollment.
So like Robert, right now, if you simply looked at our deposits and our enrollment, we look great. But as I keep telling our admissions office, you know, until I see the whites of students' eyes at the end of August and early September, we really don't completely know who's going to come and who isn't going to come. We have an interesting situation in Madison, and I'm sure this is probably true in some other places. We're so big that the vast majority of our students do not live in dorms. A lot of the freshman class does, but most of the other students do not. And almost all of them sign housing contracts usually in November or December of the previous year. So, our graduate students live in town. This is where, they're permanent residents. Many of our undergraduates have housing contracts. And what we have heard from large numbers of students is they don't want to be at home in their bedroom or their parents' basement. And what we've heard from their parents is they don't want their students at home. So, even if we weren't going to be open on campus, we would have the majority of our students in town. Now, what that means is when we are open and actually have some online classes, we're going to be actively working with those students, messaging to them about masking, physical distancing, appropriate behavior. We got a whole marketing campaign planned on this. If we were purely online and those students were in town, they wouldn't be getting any of those other messages. So, I'm actually reasonably convinced that life is going to be safer for those students who are in town if we are open than if we are not. We're going to just have a lot of people in Madison, which is another reason for us to try to offer everything that we can online, because many of our students will be there anyway.
Okay, well.
Susan, can I just make one quick comment based on what everybody else has said? One of the fallacies I hear sometimes is that it's less expensive for universities to provide online learning than it is to do in person. And people have talked about this, and I think it's been a comment in many discussions. That's simply not true, as you've heard from my colleagues today. Our investments have been absolutely significant to increase the number of online learning we're doing. We've spent a lot of money basically to teach in this modality. Our costs are based on faculty salaries primarily, graduate student stipends, postdoc salaries, and so on. That's the biggest part of our budget. And so teaching online does not save us money in any way. It's actually a cost. Essentially for the university. So I just wanted to make that point.
Excellent point to bring up, all the technology that's involved that people...
And helping the students get engaged as well.
Exactly. Sam, while we've got you, Lynn Landgraf writing, will fall sports athletes, as we alluded to, have their season? And will they have to stay on campus through the holidays to comply with new rules? If you can comment briefly on what you know about the athletic program. Robert mentioning that you're still not sure at the University of Illinois. What do we know at this point about sports in the fall?
So it is up in the air, and it's very fluid. And I think we're continuing to monitor this situation very, very closely. As was mentioned, Becky and Robert and I are all part of the Big Ten, essentially, which is a conference that I think it really cares about student athletes. Let me put this first. So that's the first thing we're talking about, again, is safety. In the same way as we've talked about our campuses, we're talking about the safety of our student athletes going forward. And in fact, we just had a notice come out, or we will be having a notice come out, about ways in which we're trying to make sure that students are not compelled to participate, that scholarships are honored for students, whether they participate in practices or not, because we really do care about this. We're trying to develop protocols that really make it as absolutely safe as we can for students to participate in sports, and that continues to be the goal. We have some very rigorous testing processes that have been developed for students, and all of us are following those, and I think they're working well, in my opinion, at least on our campus, and I'm sure on my colleagues' campuses, they're working well as well. And so we just need to see what's happening. And of course, it's not always completely our decision. State law and executive orders and others could influence what happens. But I think we would love to have the opportunity. Many of our student athletes would love to compete. It's something that matters a lot to our alumni, to our current students, and to really the campus community. So I think we're interested in trying to do this. Again, it's driven by issues around safety, and particularly as we look at our student athletes, but also the coaches, staff, and other people who are involved in their care. And they're all benefiting from the testing protocols we've developed.
Sounds like still a lot of question marks in regards to that. Do we have answers yet about fraternities and sororities? John asking, what are the plans to have any fraternity or sorority activity on campus? Will that be allowed? Robert?
Yes, we have been having conversations not only with the Greek community, but also, as Becky said, with the significant number of our students that live in non-university housing. And I think we all are operating from the principle that if our students make the decision to return to campus, that there's a certain type of behavior that we are going to be expecting of each and every one of them. They're not returning to the same kind of university environment that they left in March. And with that comes the responsibility for the social distancing, for wearing masks and getting tests. Those are going to be absolute requirements here at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And not only in terms of what happens during the course of the day when they're going to class or between classes, is the kind of behavior we're going to expect in fraternity houses and other types of student organizations, that they must adhere to those core principles. And there will be consequences if they do not adhere according to what we've developed in our student conduct code. It will be an absolute violation you can't just ignore this new environment in which we're in, and we are making sure our students understand, as Becky said, we're launching our own big PR campaign and around a framework that, I've got you covered. We've got you covered. We all have to cover each other. You have to be responsible for the safety of ourselves, but perhaps more importantly, the safety of the other. And that's the core principles that we're trying to let all students, all student organizations, and turn in the Greek community know that they have a responsibility here, and there will be consequences if they don't adhere to the expected protocol.
Can I add something to that?
Absolutely.
I think it's just incredibly important this year for students and for families whose student is thinking about joining a Greek fraternity, and particularly if they're living there, that they are a sorority, that they ask all sorts of questions about what are the health protocols that group is following. Are they following county and state protocols around gatherings and parties and size of numbers of people who get together? You just got to do your due diligence this year to make sure that you're both messaging to the fraternity sorority that you care, and that you're joining a fraternity sorority for whom the national organization is imposing the correct rules.
All right. Joanne, one of the student reporters from Loyola, Kaylee, writes, how do you decide whether or not to adjust tuition? What do you consider when making these decisions? And if I can fold that into another question from my colleague, Robbie Bockwell at ABC7, he writes, do you ever envision a situation where everything is shut down and students would be refunded? What are your thoughts? I know we talked about everybody financially struggling at this point. Parents are struggling with this as well.
True. I think I can answer the last one the easiest, which is we don't envision a situation where everything is shut down. I think all of us have demonstrated very clearly that in a short amount of time, I know for us it was within 9 days, we were able to take 3,400 sections, move it online. Our students successfully completed their semesters. They took their exams, they got their grades, and for the class of 2020, they received their diplomas. And they were working with the same faculty in February that they were, frankly, in April. So I don't think any of us envision a situation where we would, quote, be shut down. We haven't been to this point and don't anticipate that. The tuition is a complicated question. Our tuition for the fall is that we published last spring, and we are not anticipating a change to anything in our tuition.
Okay, anybody else want to chime in about tuition issues, as we are hearing, I believe it's Princeton starting to reduce tuition as well. I realize it's a sore subject, but parents are thinking about this. And if that is not possible, why don't we all talk about the quality of the online education? Because that's something we really haven't delved into yet. We've got about 6-7 minutes left here. So if anybody would like to reassure parents who are watching right now about how far we've come with these online models, and how do we make the online learning experience as effective, or at least closer to being as effective as an in-class learning environment. And I'll open that up to the group.
So I'll jump in first. We have about 150 people who are working with our faculty on basically raising the skill level on online learning. And we've got some faculty who are just superb at this. They've been doing it and using all sorts of technologies and teaching online as well as non-online courses for a long time. And we've got some faculty for whom this was completely new last March. We knew early on that our larger courses were likely to be online. So we have really gone one by one to every one of those big courses that a lot of students take, worked individually with the faculty about how they're presenting the material, what are some of the tricks of the trade, how do you use these technologies most effectively, how can you online engage a student in active learning, which can be harder. And if you've never done it before, you will not know quite how to do that most effectively. So we have had now, but we know that when we open in the fall, we've got to be delivering at a higher quality level than we did when we closed in 3 days last spring. And I think we're set up to do that.
And I would just add that here at Illinois, we have a long history of delivering online education in our business school and engineering across the entire university. So in a matter of about 12 days, it was fairly seamless to convert from face-to-face to online instruction. But just in case we have to do more online education, our provost established a online teaching academy about a month or so ago. And we've had more than 500 of our faculty members who wanted to have a bit more assistance in getting their course content online and to make sure that they are teaching as effectively as possible. And so that's the level of commitment that we have to be ready to deliver our educational content, whether it's face-to-face or online, in the way that a world-class university that we think and know that we are is expected to do. And so that's the level of investments that we're making to make sure that online is of extremely high quality and impactful.
But if I could just add one, I'm sorry, Joanne, do you want to go, or I'll go quickly? Just that we did very much the same thing that Robert and Becky talked about, and created a summer program essentially, and actually paid faculty. We actually gave the money essentially to take these courses. And we had about 650 faculty take these courses to improve online. So I think it's going to be better than it was before. And I think the important thing to me is it's still, as it is at Illinois faculty, as it is Wisconsin faculty, as it is Loyola faculty. At Michigan State, it's Michigan State University faculty teaching these courses. So you are getting the professors who are expert in these areas. And that, I think, is one of the most important things. And now we're just going to help them deliver it a little more smoothly, a little more coherently, perhaps, in some cases.
Yeah, I agree. We've been in the online learning space now for over 2 decades. Many of us, I think, have been recognized for the quality of our education. We've had faculty members who are literally developing the pedagogies and the research into how best to deliver in multimodal types of situations. So over this summer, many of our faculty, like all of you mentioned, have participated in programs that we've had developed. We have a Center for Online Learning and Education that just helps faculty specifically develop course content and help them learn to deliver it. And then for our very experienced faculty, we've actually teamed them up with faculty that may not have had that level of experience, so that they could be learning from people that have had the experience in how best to structure their learning and assess that learning with the students. And then, of course, as I bet my colleagues have done as well, we ask our faculty, we ask our students, and you can see in the results, whether it's test scores or standardized exams, how well we're doing, and then we measure against that. So we are very, very confident that the quality and the depth and the breadth of the educational experience will be that of a world-class institution as well.
Well, we are at 1 o'clock, but I just want to give you all a chance to respond to one more question or whatever thought you have here to wrap this up about what lessons have we learned from this going forward? Will there be some of these applications now that will continue into the future because they're working?
So I think for me, 2 things. One is, as we've talked about, a growing number of our faculty experience the online learning, experience the development of hybrid courses for the first time. And I think they're seeing some of the value in this. And I think for some of our students, maybe recognizing that this is a way they can learn as well, as that's important. And the second thing is shout out really to our faculty and staff, and particularly staff who've been working from home and doing remarkable work from home. And I think like other large organizations, I think we're learning that many people are capable of being very productive remotely. And I think that may change our space allocations and other things on campus as we go forward. And finally, the commitment to students for all of us. And I think that the working together that's happened between institutions has been, I think, a great lesson for us in how we can tackle a big problem like this working together. So that's it for me.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, I think there's going to be more thoughtfulness about what is the value of face-to-face time, the precious time in the classroom with faculty, and how should you use that time? And I suspect there's going to be, for instance, a lot more use of things like flipped classrooms, where you deliver the, you know, the lecture content, you know, is expected to be picked up, you know, at evening, whenever, you know, on your laptop. And when you come together, you're really doing much more active learning, working through problem sets, discussing issues, doing applications of the material to some real world problem. And, that ability to use these technological tools to find ways to teach more effectively is, I hope, going to be one of the long-term benefits of what is not a very beneficial experience right now.
Yeah, I'll jump in, and I'm going to pick up on what both Sam and Rebecca said, which is this has also forced many of us to break down some longstanding barriers, even across disciplines. So we're seeing much more collaboration, much more interdisciplinary work, working across institutions in ways that we're able to bring the best knowledge forward. And as we indicated, there is this change that being, if you will, remote is now much more accepted. And we know that the world that our students will be going into, whatever their professions, whatever they're choosing to do, they're going to be living in a world that's going to have a little different balance than it may have 9 months ago. So actually, this gives us the opportunity to help prepare them, as we all do, for the world that they're stepping into. So this creates a lot of opportunities for many of us, and frankly has shown us that we can be nimble, and we can be innovative, and we can be leading a new way forward.
Robert?
Yeah, well, I won't repeat what my colleagues said, but I agree with everything they've said about how this is going to redefine, I think, how education is delivered. And I think that what we're calling the hybrid model, I would predict, is going to be the norm for the next few decades, because in many ways, it has many very, very attractive elements that enhances the learning experiences for our students. And so we should try to embrace and hold on to all of that. But I think hopefully some of the lessons, Susan, would be for the citizens, the parents that invest, and the taxpayers that invest in our institutions. I hope this pandemic has provided an opportunity for them to see the value of universities, in particular research universities, those of us that have an obligation to serve the public, and how we leverage the expertise of our faculty to help inform state governments about making critical decisions that impact all the decisions the governor and others must make, and how we leverage our faculty to create innovation, to make respirators, rapid vent respirators like we did here, or to do the modeling that tells us what are the best course of actions to take in order to avoid the thousands and thousands of deaths that certainly would have occurred if we didn't do the stay in place order, and we don't wear a mask, and we don't do the contact tracing. And so that's what I hope comes out of this as well, for the taxpayers of our individual states, an appreciation for the value proposition of higher education as an institution, the role that we play in educating our students, whether that's face-to-face or online or blended, but more importantly, the innovation and our ability to solve complex problems in a very, very short time frame in a way that impacts us all. So hopefully that's a lesson learned as well.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Robert, while I still have you on the spot here, Ravi asked a follow-up question to something you had said earlier. We were talking about new health rules that are in place, particularly in regard to extracurriculars and fraternities and sororities, in regards to athletics too. You talked about misbehavior would have some serious consequences. Ravi is asking specifically, what are those consequences? And as a fellow reporter, I understand him being on deadline. He's looking for a little bit more clarification, if you could be so kind.
Well, I can't go into great detail because a lot of this is being a work in progress according to our student conduct code, where we are really codifying in our student conduct code and other places, you know, the kind of behavior that we expect out of our students. So I'm afraid I can't go into any great detail about it, but the notion that we're trying to make sure people understand is that there will be consequences for behavior that's antithetical to the kind of environment that we are trying to build about keeping each other safe. You know, whether they may be brought up on some disciplinary hearings as a result of not abiding by social distancing or wearing masks and not participating in the testing and other contact tracing strategies that we've developed.
Anyone else care to comment on new safety rules that will be in place, perhaps in cafeterias, in dorm rooms, and how they will handle misbehavior and complaints of misbehavior?
You know, I want to say something about how, you know, if we have to enforce this through misconduct rules and disciplinary hearings, we will fail utterly. That the only way we are going to be successful at creating the healthy culture that we want to create on campus is going to be through proactive and positive peer pressure and positive messaging. You know, wear your mask. If you don't care about yourself, wear your mask to protect others, to protect the community, to, you know, to be part of this community. And those proactive and positive messages about who we are as a community is what is going to have to drive this, because we can't enforce this student by student.
Sam?
I agree 100%. And that's why we're spending a lot of time rolling out a very comprehensive marketing campaign that puts the responsibility back on the students, and that they have the responsibility for protecting themselves and perhaps more importantly, protecting others. But we do think it may, if necessary, we have to have, you know, some way of enforcing behavior if there's a continued, you know, disregard for the health and safety of others.
So I agree with both Becky and Robert. I think both those things are critical. And as I said at the beginning, the first principle we have is that people have to take personal responsibility and be willing to care for others. And Spartans do that. And that's our first responsibility, is you have to do that. And I think that's our expectation for everyone who decides to come to our campus, whether it be faculty, students, staff, or visitors. That's our expectation.
Yeah, and I echo that. We talk about it, Loyola, that we are persons for others. And it is really about the responsibility and accountability that we take on ourselves and to each other. And we're emphasizing that we're also part of our neighborhood and we are part of Chicago. So we also have a responsibility not only to ourselves and our campus, but to our neighbors. So it is this balance. Yes, you have to have sanctions in place, but that's not what's going to make this work.
I agree.
Well said, all of these esteemed panelists. We are so grateful. I'm speaking on behalf of the audience of parents and students and journalists who are all very hungry for all of this information. This has been a very informative and insightful discussion, and we still know there's a lot of things that have yet to be determined. The time will tell. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank you all for your expertise, your time, your thoughtful consideration for the large audience that is involved in taking in every word you have to say here about the fall. And cheers to a good fall. I mean, we just, you know, God bless. Let's hope everything goes smoothly, and we'll do the best we can and muddle through and adapt along the way. So Joanne, Robert, Sam, Rebecca, thank you so much. We also want to thank the Lincoln Forum. We want to thank the Union Club of Chicago and Politico for putting together this very important webinar. And good luck to everyone in the fall. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be safe, everyone.
Thank you.